Well, here we go. All right, well, thank you all so much for coming to the Making of Atomic. We're so excited. This was a great show, a fun process, as much as the show can be fun. But thank you so much for joining us today. Has everybody had a chance to see Atomic already? Awesome, great. Yeah, now Anne hasn't. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. If this is your first time coming to one of these, we love doing this. I love talking to the production staff about everything we go through of deciding the show to casting to all the different aspects it takes to put a show like this together. So again, thank you for coming. Start off with introductions. Miss Sarah Porter is our costume designer. Ben Rosemann is our sound designer extraordinaire. Then of course our artistic director and co-director of the show, Scott Miller. Then we have, Rob. I'm failing, right? Yeah. Then we have our scenic designer, Rob. And lighting designer, yes, this time double duty, yes. And then a consultant of the show, we brought somebody in that has a lot of scientific background to come talk in, Rob's wife, Kathleen. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. And again, I'm Mike Dowdy, and also co-director and associate artistic director. And then Kimmy Short, our props master. Yes. I always start off these things because I love this question, and I'm going to keep it the same, but I'm going to direct it towards Scott. And I really, for this one especially, what pulled you in to want to do this show? What about it grabbed you and you said, we have to do this?
I've been reading about it on Plato.com a lot because it was coming to Off-Broadway. And my first instinct was a musical about the atomic bomb. Yes. Sounds like a new line. And I found one clip on YouTube from the original Australian production. The writers are both from Australia, and they first produced it there. And it was the song What I Tell Myself, which is almost the end of the show. And I watched that song on YouTube and was just blown away by it. Because if you haven't seen the show, did we find out for people who haven't seen the show yet?
No, they don't have it.
If you haven't seen the show, it's this song late in the show where the scientists kind of looking back on everything that's happened, kind of grappling with the morality of it and how do I deal with this? How do I sleep at night? And I just thought that was so interesting. It's like anybody who wrote that song, this show is going to be cool. Like, this is obviously really interesting. So I contacted the writers and they sent me the script and I liked it. I didn't love the script, but I liked it. And I thought, well, we've done a lot of shows where I read it, it doesn't totally make sense to me, but then we do it and it's awesome and amazing. So I was like, I need to just trust this. So I wrote back to the writers and said, yeah, we really want to do this. And they said, well, we're doing some big rewrites. And then kind of gave me this menu of all the things they wanted to change. And everything sounded great. I was like, those are all outstanding changes. Very happy about all of them. So we committed to doing the show. I had not yet seen the final script, but I was pretty confident it was going to be pretty great. And so when we did finally get the final script, it was way better than what I had read, and just a really, really cool piece of theater, and really not coming down on one side or the other of an issue, which is my favorite thing. Makes the audience grapple with it. So yeah, so I was very excited about that. And then the writers were both very excited. They decided right away they were going to come see us, and so yeah, it turned out to be a very cool thing.
That's great. I know after reading it myself and then listening to the music, what I liked about it was it really dealt more about the morality of it and about the human beings rather than them just building the bomb right in front of everybody and it being more about the bomb necessarily than the people, and that's what I liked. Were those changes before? Was the show still about that before all those rewrites and everything like that, or was it more?
Yes. ... Yeah. So what I was about to say before you asked that question was that often young musical theater writers ask me, how do you know if a story will make a good musical? And for a long time I didn't know the answer, but I decided the answer is, if this is a story primarily about emotion, about people's emotion, that will make a good musical. That's what music does the best, right? I think the show now, Atomic, is about emotion. it's about these people, and it's this incredibly human, personal drama, you know. I think the original production in Australia, it was that, but it was also a pretty flashy rock concert. And then when they took it to Off-Broadway, the producer who brought it over gave them an American director and an American co-writer to fix it, and really took them astray. They turned Enrico Fermi into this very silly comic character, and they kind of lost the emotional content. It kind of became more about the bomb. And so it tanked Off-Broadway. And they went back to Australia with many, many lessons learned. And they essentially went back to the beginning, to what they had first tried to write, which was pretty much a straightforward drama, you know? And so now I think it fits my criteria. I think it is primarily a human story. It's not a story about science. Science is the environment, you know? And I think the show does a pretty great job of teaching you just as much science as you need.
Right.
You know, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Going back on what you said about the emotion of it and all of that, I really agree with you, because emotion is what gets us invested, and what we say to the actors a lot is listen to the music behind you, because it will give you your emotion. It will help you change when there's big changes in music. It's for a reason, and that you can really use that as fuel.
And can I also say, one of the things I love about this show is there's a ton of underscoring. And it is the most beautiful, most expressive underscoring. I mean, in a way, it kind of reminds me of Sweeney Todd. It really feels like film music.
Yeah.
You know, and we often get little quotes of melodies that connect this moment back to this moment. It's just incredibly beautifully crafted underscoring, which is not something you get all the time, you know?
Yeah. And then once again, going back to what you said about giving us just enough science to know, it's much like, I will say, Big Bang Theory for me, a much more serious Big Bang Theory, but of all the scientific things that are in there, the actors really go about it naturally. And for me, that's really great. I think we had a lot of help with Kathleen from that. And now I'm going to shift over just a little bit to you, Kathleen. Can you explain to us about what your role was coming in, and how you helped the actors really make sense out of things that they did not know at all about?
Can I just interject before that? It was very important to me, because these actors are talking about science all through this show, and talking about very specific science. And, you know, if we do a show set in another time period, I do everything I can to give everybody all the information we can about that time period. And it seemed to me that it was so valuable that you could come in, and that these actors now have a basic understanding of atomic physics and how the bomb works. And I think it served us incredibly well.
Yeah.
Well, they were great students. I basically gave them a crash course in nuclear physics, nuclear chemistry. It started with making sure they understood the terminology of what radioisotopes are, why they're radioactive, and then how they harnessed it, how the cyclotrons work that Szilard was developing. So used a lot of tools, and they caught on quickly. They understood it. When they said the lines, I didn't want it to be because they memorized it. I wanted it to be because they were convincing and truly understood it. And as I watched the play, I certainly felt that way. Every single actor flowed with their lines and felt comfortable with it. But in addition, I also wanted them to understand the characters, because they were very complex people. And I have done a lot of work with understanding them historically, so we spent time understanding how the characters helped develop these scientific tools. And that was a challenge there, but there is a wealth of material available, archived papers, archived interviews that they could use to learn the science with them. And I gave them so many books. I got 2 bookshelves full of just nuclear ones. I do workshops with WashU and with Mizzou with nuclear, so I had all these materials. And after I gave them to the actors, they would devour them and ask for more. I mean, so they really were invested in understanding not just the science, but how these people learned about it. They made it very easy to work with them. I can't say my students are always that.
Yeah. Well, I know they benefited from benefited from it a lot because you are a great teacher. An award-winning teacher who met the president, but I just to do it in one night and not have a whole, 2-week seminar on this stuff. I think they, as you said, they really did get it, but that was because of you, and because of you, they were able to go deeper into their characters and really pull that out. And why I compared it to Big Bang is because those actors on that show as well say things that's great to me, but it's natural, it's coming out naturally, and I think they really, really did that in this. So thank you so much for being involved and helping out with that.
One of the cool things was Kathleen pointed us onto this graphic novel called Trinity that totally explains everything about the bomb, the physics, politics, like everything you can imagine. And that was also like so helpful.
Yes.
It was just like written for us to do this show.
Yeah. Switching gears, I'm going to go to Rob Lippert now. What was your approach to this show after reading it? What made you decide this setup? And I will say, for our third show in a new space, this is our third configuration. So I just want, what was your thought process? What did you go through to end up with this?
Well, this show is really about, as Scott's already said, it's really about the moral dilemmas and the ethical questions that these scientists face. And so I guess the big idea here is that no matter where you sit in the audience, the backdrop is the audience. And so you, as an audience observer, are watching your fellow Americans experience these moral dilemmas at the same time. The facial expressions, all of those things are part of the scenic design for this show. Subsequently, I did something that I absolutely is a cardinal sin in lighting design, which is that the lights, and you can see it here, the lights go about 3 rows up. So the audience is lit the whole show. And it means the light is kind of in the audience's eyes a little bit, but they're part of the cast in this particular instance. It means that we're all facing these moral dilemmas together. So that's the reason that the configuration is done the way it is, even though it was a nightmare to block, as you know. I've given you guys 3 different designs, and all 3 of them have been hard to work with.
The triangle was hardest.
But I mean, this is really kind of like working in the round a little bit, pseudo in the round. So it's at least a form that's not uncommon. Right? It's not undone.
And with lighting, I know you said that I actually enjoyed it. I liked seeing the reactions that our scientists were doing, and then also seeing the reactions on, as you said, the other people's faces. I liked seeing that they did become cast as well, and we're watching each other, watching this. I kind of like that. I didn't see that being a problem of, half our audience is lit or whatever. I know you did have a couple of issues with lighting because of this setup. Can you talk about a few of those that you...
Well, the hardest thing about lighting in this configuration is you're lighting 2 stages. It takes twice as many lights, and there's twice as much to have to worry about. So normally, if we staged a show in typical proscenium, where the audience is all out there, cast all is here, telling the story one way, one set of lights coming in. Here, the cast is both ways, the audience is both ways, and we're lighting from both directions. So it's twice as much, everything is twice as much, and then you're dealing with balance, you're dealing with shining light in the audience's eyes. And then Scott threw a ringer at me, and he had people up on the table, which means that I have to shoot almost completely straight across the theater in order to light someone who's 6 feet tall on top of a 3-foot table. So those were some of the distinct challenges that, it's hard when you got a 14-foot ceiling and their head is at 9 feet. How do you keep them in the light? But those are technical problems.
Right. Well, and I think it all worked itself out because I liked the flow of the pools of light, of the changing of areas so quickly, and I can't speak for everyone, but as an audience member, I went along with it. I didn't see. I know we had a couple issues too, and Zach being, you know, taller, and if they're not thinking about what we call camera angles of being diagonal from each other, she's just completely overshadowed by Zach. But again, it's things that work themselves out, and I really enjoyed it. And I really love these practicals that are hanging up here. That they really add to the scenes, especially when they're in the laboratory and things like that.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that I had to do, since I don't have a backdrop, I have an audience for a backdrop, I don't have a built backdrop, is I had to create a plane that helped to establish this as a space. And I only had the floor and the ceiling, and then obviously the two walls that we weren't using. In the round is really hard because all sides are in use, and you can only use the top and bottom. But that's why this is up here, and that's why it's floating down a little bit, why the practicals are even a little bit lower. It's to bring that ceiling down so this feels like a room in the middle of the stage. And now the audience becomes voyeurs into the laboratory and into Truda's apartment and those places, into the bar. You're sort of peering through the windows and watching the story unfold.
And I think, isn't this the first time this show was done with this intimacy? This size?
Yeah, it's only been done in relatively big houses, pushing you.
Okay. And then, as you said before, the more rock concert.
Yeah. Oh, and I was going to say about blocking, because he does keep giving me sets that are very hard to block on, but they end up really cool. I called Steve Wolf at the Rep and said, okay, I'm about to do a show that's essentially in the round. I don't want to call anything down center or down left or down right, because we did that with Heather's, and then we moved into the theater. It was kind of confusing for the audience, because down center wasn't down center. And so it's like, okay, well, how do we talk about where you're coming in? You know, we got 4 corners that actors can come in. Anyway, so Steve said, I usually use a clock. Put a clock on the stage. 12 o'clock's one in, 6 o'clock, we're like, perfect. So we talked about the 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock entrance, 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock entrance. And I just never thought to do that, but it was perfect.
Yeah, and it worked. They caught on, they got it, and once we moved into here, it was like, wait a minute, I thought it was, and even I got confused a couple times because in the rehearsal room, we didn't have the setup to make 2 sides. So we had just a row of chairs and a row of chairs over here, and I would mainly be sitting over on this side. And so when we moved in here, I sat over here, and I'm like, whoa, isn't this 12 o'clock? And he's like, no, it's over here. And so he didn't confuse me, but it worked. It really worked. It really helped. Yeah, instead of saying, you know, the normal actor window or whatever.
Well, and part of that is down center is where the actor always wants to go.
Right.
And so if we named any one place, down center, down left, down right, the actor would gravitate towards that. And what I was trying to figure out is how to get them not to gravitate anywhere.
Right.
You know.
And for this as well, we had to tell them to constantly move. We had them go to extremes to where I told them each line face a different way, because you can't stay with one side too long on one side. You know, if you're having a conversation with somebody, this side will forgive that they can't see me, because this, you know, and then vice versa, this side will forgive that they can't see them because they can see me and my reactions. But if you're constantly moving, you're constantly sharing, and they have to in a situation like this, because if it's too stagnant, it won't play, and we won't get to see the emotions we want to see or the reactions that we want to see.
Well, and then we have a big obstacle in the middle, because the table is a big obstacle. It's sort of the same problem we had with creative solution that we had in Rent when we did the Big Moon. It immediately carves it into multiple places,
Which is awesome.
and it's also a huge obstacle in the middle of the room. You got action over here, and these people feel a little detached, and vice versa. So there are some challenges to doing this.
But what it did is it isolated an area if we wanted it. You know, we could only be there, we could only be here, or we could be the whole thing.
You know where I
nice.
think where that works the absolute best are the bar scenes and the apartment scenes, where it really pushes it down. This becomes the edge of the apartment, and where the water bottle is becomes the edge of the bar. It's really, I think that was really effective.
And I thought it all pulled together, even if we isolate over here, when we had those scenes that they're all around the table and arguing across the table. And I liked seeing those moments of, it just really brought it all together. And it, you know, we didn't do it throughout the whole show, but when we did, it brought it all together and you could really follow each scene and go with that. I really like that. No segue for this one, but Sarah Porter. I really enjoyed the costumes in the show. I want to know what your process was, what you kind of do when looking at a show, when Scott says, hey, we're going to do this show, and you look at it and you think, okay, where do I start?
What was different about this one from some of the other stuff that I've done with you guys is that it is a very specific time and it is very specific people. And so there's been shows that you're like, I don't care, maybe everybody look like a mishmash of everything. It'll look great, and it does. It works out and it looks great. With this, you can't just mishmash it up because it's a very specific, it's actual people. So what really is beneficial, it was really super helpful for me, was being able to, God, I love the internet, look people up and be like, oh, that's what she looked like. Okay, well, I can go from there. Like, without making it look like a carbon copy to a T, but that way you get the idea. There's certain specific things that have to happen, that have to, there's things like Ray had to have texture in his suit. I had to have texture in his suit because every time you see Enrico, I can't say his last name correctly. Yeah. Every time you see him, he's always wearing these like woolen, pretty, just attractive suits that nobody else is wearing from all the other people. And so it's stuff like that like you have to be able to pick and pull and go through. Fortunately, we have a lot of stuff in stock, which I was surprised. And Amazon Prime is the greatest invention since the atomic bomb. Is that a bold statement?
Now, did you two have a discussion at all, you know, when doing production or whatever like that? Did you all have a discussion of, because it goes through so many time periods, did we have a discussion of we need to do each time period?
No, we really didn't.
I think we just kind of landed there in the middle. Yeah, I think the only specific thing I said to her about this was, I love glasses. If any of them had glasses, give them glasses.
Oh, yeah, the only one that had them is Zach. Well, that and the working girls.
Oh, right, the factory girls, yeah.
The factory girls, which I know that girls that worked in factories in the 40s either wore men's clothes, they wore jumpsuits, they wore overalls, that whole thing. But I think because I had looked into a bunch of stuff that the show had been, I had in my head these like adorable outfits, and so like brought out these adorable dresses that I found, and they all looked so cute. And Scott was like, I have no idea what they're doing. They look like Lucy and Ethel. I don't know what they're doing. They look like they work at the candy factory.
Well, and I kind of understood where you were coming from on that, because it was because that number is so Andrew's sister, and like I thought it was going to be that play on it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what we ended up with, I thought was great because it made them more
part of the story
real
it made it
women, but they're singing in this manner.
No, it made it definitely real, and you had pointed that out where it was like, I get it now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amazon Prime again.
And I will say Zach's suit is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I do like Zach's suits.
But what part of what I like is we have several different kinds of suits.
Yeah.
You know, like Teller has the strap across the back, which is really cool, but they all look period.
Well, and his is so not period. But I found it and it was an attractive color and he put it on and it fit him beautifully, and I was like, we'll forgive the 70s lapels. I will forgive them. Most other people aren't going to know.
Across
So
the back looks very pretty
it
to
does
me.
look cool.
Yeah.
It is not. It is not, but thank you.
You just told the secret.
I did.
Was there anything else that was challenging in the show that, I mean, besides finding all of these suits?
It is really hard to find clothes, like, you have to find things for dudes that are period, even though guys' clothes don't change. Like, guys' clothes haven't changed since, like, 1900. Just minute, yeah, like, just the tie, like, the lapels, or the strap across the back, or, like, a wide leg, skinny tie, right. I know some of the guys were like, I don't know if I can wear these shoes, they look modern. I was like, honey, nobody is looking at your shoes. If they're looking at your shoes, we have a lot of issues with the show. People are paying attention to your shoes. was for the guys, it was trying to find that kind of balance with what looked right. And then some of it a lot for the girls too, because you had to have, nobody was in that time period to be good looking if they were the scientists. Like you weren't like dressing for being the fashion plate of the fashion plates. It's like we need to find, you know, you are a scientist and you're a woman, and that's already a huge deal. You're not going to be dressing like everybody else is going to be dressing. You're dressing like you're there for work and you have to do business. So
right, and I know Marissa, for her role, Winona, I know she said a lot of the research she did and like pictures that she saw, they thought she was rather dowdy and really plain, and you know, and not like you said, she's all
there to
work,
work. She's not there for looking cute. So.
Right.
Did you have challenge? Because we had 2 characters who had to switch back and forth a lot, 2 actors. Was that particularly difficult or not so much?
I don't think so.
No.
Maybe for them, I didn't engage with.
So the casting changes are like 15 seconds.
You hand it to them, and you guys are so great because you're like, yeah, no, I can make it happen. It's fine. It'll work. So we found, I know, with Jeff, we found ways so that he can layer and dress quickly and whatnot.
I know Anne has a quick change too out of the
overalls.
Does it work? It
Our
works.
jumpsuits are great. It's
Yeah.
Zipper goes down, jumpsuit off, you know, little headscarf on.
I'm cold. Oh no. Good. That's good to hear.
I heard somebody actually chuckle, like react when I came out about 10 seconds later. The other night.
That's funny.
Yep.
All right, Ben, you want to come down and join us? Because I know that there's a lot I want to talk to you about in this show.
Okay. Yeah, I'm coming down.
You're fun, Ben.
My perch in the sky. What's up?
Aside from the always problem of 16 mic, well, not so much
Yeah.
with this one.
Happens in this show.
Normally the big problem is 16 mics, people running in and out of everywhere, and you have to turn them on and turn them off.
And often throwing themselves around and on the floor.
Right.
Yeah.
Punching holes in walls. I know with this one, Scott was telling me, in this one, there's multiple points where there's a lot of layering sounds and mixing it all together and putting it together. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
And yet we still have to hear the lyrics.
Right. Yeah, I mean, definitely with having as many cast members, that side of my, I guess, responsibilities has been a little bit lighter and easier than in past shows. But as far as the layering and stuff goes, there's a couple moments in particular, namely like towards the end of the first act when we have you have the warning siren going off and the countdown with Victoria and all the dialogue and everything else going on top of it right before the explosion and everything. You know, there's a lot of different elements that I have to manage there because you have basically everyone on stage at that moment, as well as I have to cue up one sound effect and then take that down right before I cue the explosion. And all of those have to be, you know, at the right volumes because, like, you know, the explosion you want to be loud and impactful and to really feel that. But I know it's just been a lot of, you know, getting used to the timing of things and kind of where I need to bring things up and focus on one element versus another is to actually, you know, getting those things done, being able to fulfill that multitasking.
Right, and you can really feel, especially towards the end of Act 1 where they're doing the test for the bomb, and it's you can really feel that building of it. Because that
there's a lot of tension right there.
Yeah, and that siren comes in and you don't, it's like, it's there, but it's not blaring, and so that makes it even, you know.
And I think a lot of the figuring out as far as where elements need to sit in the mix and everything, a lot of that I accomplished during, you know, just our pre-show week and everything, just kind of sitting there listening to where the band's playing at dynamic-wise, where the actors are at and everything, and just kind of, I guess, prioritizing all of that information in the sound field.
Right.
So.
The other thing I think is really amazing, speaking of timing, is the work between the lights and the sound to create that bomb at the end of Act 1.
You know, the sad irony is that the lighting effect was programmed long before I ever heard the sound effect. In some respects, we just got lucky.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't probably say that, but we did. We got lucky.
We get lucky a lot.
And it's okay.
But then once hearing it all together and seeing it all together, there was some fine tuning of you guys working together, of really making sure that the timing happens down. Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was with the reverb tail of it, and I know you kind of have that like radiation with the black lights and whatnot, which I love that effect so much, by the way. I think that works really well.
Well, and it's the same too of, just as the sound was building, it's almost, the bomb goes off and it's taking away those layers. You know, it's like we see that red go over the actors and over the audience, and then that starts to fade as the black lights come up, and it's almost, you know, we're building, and then it's gone. You know,
So with that is a segue that I would like to make a comment, and that is that that what the black light reveals is another area where our consultant was invaluable. Because she and Melanie and one of her students, one of her AP chemistry students, spent an afternoon in here and painted all of that on the wall.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's it. And it was, I know we had talked about it a long time ago, and you wanted to keep that secret from Scott because it was so.
Yeah, did you film his reaction?
Well, you know, it was sad irony, because after it was all done and it was all programmed in and it was all ready to go, Scott walked in and he looks at the wall and says, "What's on the wall?" There's a little the paint is completely invisible, except that there's a sheen difference between the flat black on the wall and it's a matte finish as opposed to flat, and so you can see a little bit of light reflecting on it. And I tried to hide it. I took the diffusion out of the house lights, so the house lights point more straight down and they don't wash up on the walls like they normally do. But there's just enough that you can see a little bit of reflection, and you see, if you're looking, you see it. So Scott
I
spotted
think
it.
that's the key though, if you're looking, you see it.
Right.
How did you see that? I don't understand.
Well,
That's what you say, but it just shines a little different.
I put Ann in a different costume every night. You never notice.
I had not pulled the diffusion on the house lights when Scott had come in, so the walls were more lit than they are now. So that's the difference.
Well, it's really neat, and it just adds to it. And not only that, but the gobos that pulse on the floor too of the atom is really neat as well.
Well, you know, Scott and I talked. Scott likes to paint something on the floor for every show, and it's like, well, in here I've had 2 bad experiences with painting on the floor. Meaning, not bad, but it didn't really work out great. And American Idiot was probably worse for me as a designer than Heather's was. Heather's, we did the emblem on the floor for the high school, and that was pretty cool. You know, the big logo. For American Idiot, we had a splat of red, a splat of white, and a splat of blue in each of the primary playing areas for the 3 heroes. And from about the second or third row back, you couldn't see it.
Yeah, but that kind of stuff is, you see it on the way in,
You do,
which I like that.
but that's why doing the projected gobos on the floor and having them actually pulsate, and the audience walks through that light as they come in, and once the show starts, they're gone. And then when it gets to intermission, they come back and they're there again, and then they're gone, and after the show, they're back again. So it accomplishes what Scott wanted to accomplish, which is to have something on the floor, and yet it allows me as the designer to erase it for the show. Because everything else is very realistic.
Right. Yeah. Going back to Ben, with this configuration, did you have any issues, any problems, some difficulties that you had to deal with?
Definitely. I mean, we couldn't use the house speakers for one because we only had 3, and we needed at least 4 to get the job accomplished with having 2 sides and having stereo on both sides. So what we ended up doing actually is we have, you know, our main speakers on either side in stereo, and then we have all of our low ends coming out of that speaker right there. Because the ones we have up right now are mainly good for vocals, but don't get much lower than you know, all that low end like bass you would need for explosions and all those kind of sound effects. So we had to fiddle with that a little bit, but I mean that wasn't necessarily a huge challenge as much as a logistics problem. Aside from that, the only other thing I can think of that I struggled with this space was during the first week, we had some weird phenomenon going on with the table where it would feedback whenever anyone got too close to the table. And then that went away after like a week. I think it was just there was too much low end in people's voices, and that was reflecting back. But we haven't had any problems with that since. So I'd say those were probably my two biggest issues that I faced.
And with a lighter cast, have we had any issues with like mics and?
Not really. Yeah, I can't really think of any issues we've had aside from like the occasional crackle, but that's gonna happen regardless.
Well, we don't have people rolling around.
Right. I was gonna say it's definitely for the actors too. It's a lot easier on them, especially compared to American Idiot. You know,
Right.
people thrashing.
Well, now I just want to go ahead.
It's not easy.
Now I just want to go ahead and open up the floor. If you guys have any questions for us, any about anything, go ahead and raise your hand. Kimmy will come around with a mic. It's mainly for the recording, just so we can get it. But I think Colin had one over here. Kimmy.
Thank you. Great job, everyone. The production is fantastic. Enjoyed it a lot. Hoping to see it again this weekend. I wanted to talk about the changes you had to make with the bad luck you've had with cast injuries. There was one actor that was injured just before production opened, and one that was injured in the middle of the production. And I was curious what impact that had on any of your specific elements.
Yeah, just to start that off, Ryan Foisey, who played Compton, he had an accident where he fell off his scooter and hurt his hip pretty bad. So he came into rehearsal and told Scott, what did he tell you, Scott?
He came and he's like, yeah, so I think I got like a crack in my hip or something, I'm not sure, but I'm okay. I can do the show, and you know, I've got kind of a limp. I hope that's okay. And I'm like, I don't care, I have a limp, so you can do the show. But we had this staging for the opening number where the entire cast was power walking around this table really fast. And then I had them all climbing up, standing on these chairs. And it was immediately obvious to me there was no way Ryan could walk really fast or climb on a chair. And so I was like, all right, I'll figure it out. And just let it percolate, because that's what works best. And I literally was laying in bed that night, and I thought, I know what I can do. And I like totally had an idea for keeping Ryan stationary the whole time. We brought Zach out, who's the main character, who wasn't in the opening number, but now we introduce him. Like, I think like the change is better than it was before.
Right.
And then Ryan didn't have to walk faster, climb on chairs. And then, in the middle of the run, Zach was hit by a truck. So it's a horrible car accident. Miraculously, no permanent damage. But super, super sore all down one side of his body. So we're on the phone with Zach. We had to cancel 2 shows. We're like, you think you're going to be back this weekend? Yeah, I think so. And I'm like, okay. So we had Zach climbing on a chair, walking down this table. It's like, okay, Zach can't climb on the table anymore. What are we doing about that? But then again, honest to God, laying in bed that night, I was just like, I know what we're gonna do. So we just kept Zach standing at the end of the table. Everybody else on stage did exactly what they were doing before, and it hardly changed anything. And now Zach doesn't walk down the table, but if you don't know he did, no big deal. But I was thinking to myself, boy, it could be so much worse. Like, Ryan has a limp, big deal. Zach can't climb the table, that's okay. We're still doing Atomic.
And they're alive.
Right, yeah.
That was the main reason, and I'm getting married in 11 days, and Zach's my best man, so he can't die. But did it cause did it seem like it caused anything, and maybe Ann can weigh on this too, did it seem like it caused any problems for the actors at all?
The only thing, Ryan, I think tried one night, maybe 2 nights, to use a cane. And he asked me what I thought of it, and I was like, well, do you need it? And he's like, no, I don't need it. And I was like, do whatever easiest.
Yeah, he asked me the same thing.
So he put the cane away.
I told him, I was like, if you need the cane, if it's helping you and it's helping your pain, then use it. But that's totally up to you,
Yeah, and I don't think it had any effect other than
don't think so. There's a couple scenes where, hi, I'm Dan, I play Truda. There's a couple scenes where Zach and I have to embrace, have to hug.
Oh.
And we actually did just a tiny change. We were both wearing our mics on the right side of our face, and I think it's better for him to have it now, us wearing the mics on the left side of our face, so we, hug on the not mic side.
Yeah.
I do notice that sometimes, and he sounds phenomenal. I mean, he didn't break anything, he's still Zach. And I remember all of the actors asked Zach, like, especially one like Ray and I think, and the ones that we hug, that we have like very small physical stuff with. If you would have seen that first picture of Zach that we got back, like, it was super, super scary looking, like, because he was making a face because he's Zach.
Yeah.
But he was wearing, like, I think they just did this as a precautionary thing. It looked super scary. He had put a neck brace on him. He was taken by ambulance. I mean, the first thing we heard was, Wendy's following the ambulance to Mars, and we're all just like, what? Just collectively, separately, because we're all looking at our phones, wondering how Zach is doing. But, the first picture we see, he's wearing a neck brace. His arms are just absolutely just cut up from the broken glass. To see the picture of the car, you might think this person got killed. Like, it was really kind of harrowing looking. So we weren't really sure. They spent, you were with them, they spent hours in the ER, hours and hours.
Yeah, even if he would have been able, if the doctor was like, oh, you can do the show tonight, he would have been able to, because we were there from like 10 or 2:30, and then I left at 8:30, and they were still there until like 10 or 11. It was nuts.
And in a ton of pain, I'm sure. And so the weekend he came back, we all kind of asked him, like, so is it okay if I, touch your arm? Is it okay if I hug you? And he was like, yeah, it's fine, you can do that. And just the only thing that, is slightly different is just, I know that getting, like, standing up maybe and then putting his jacket on and taking his jacket off just a little bit slower, it's imperceptible, I think, to anybody.
Yeah.
So, but he's, absolutely trooper. Ryan, obviously, he's not going to win, nobody else gets hurt. But we're just really happy that, first and foremost, that he's okay, and obviously that Ryan's okay, and just ecstatic that he could come back and maybe go on and do the show.
So, funny thing, during the first weekend, maybe the second weekend, because Ryan's limp is getting less as he feels better, but we've had a number of audience people come up and say, so did Compton really have a limp? The actor has a limp.
We should have just said yes. Or tell him, go look it up. Does that answer, is that good for you? Any other questions about anything from anybody?
I took advantage of the fact that we were selling the CD to the show out here, so I picked one up and sort of listening and comparing what I remember of the show. And one thing I noticed listening to the songs, and I'm not sure where that fell in the preceding 3 or 4 productions of this, but there were no Fermi songs on the CD. So I was wondering if that was a recent addition or if that was part of the it changes all along the way. I was saying that you might tell more about what you knew of the prior. You saying the Off-Broadway was not an impressive production, but if there were kind of structural adds or takeaways in a more specific way, like character changes or anything like that.
What happened to the writers when they came to America to Off-Broadway was that everyone they encountered essentially said, you don't understand how American musicals work. Apparently a lot of people were pretty condescending and tried to turn it into a musical comedy, tried to turn it into, Mamma Mia, essentially. And our writers were kind of like, well, we're from Australia, and these guys are supposed to be experts, and they didn't go along with everything, but they went along with a lot of one of the things, I just think this is so funny, one of the things that they didn't go along with, somebody on the American team, there's a song in the show called Headlights, and the hook is true to sing about Leo, and the hook is blinding brilliant headlights of this love. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song. Anyway, somebody on the American team was like, you can't call it that. And the Australian guys were like, well, why can't we call it that? And the Americans were like, headlights means boobs. And the audience is gonna laugh. And the Australian guys are like, no, it doesn't always mean that, and no, they're not gonna laugh, and no, we're not gonna change it. So they refused to change it. But they did change a lot, and apparently none for the better. So, so that's kind of, so the Australian production originally was kind of rock concert-y, but I think closer to what they were trying to write, you know, basically a serious story. Went to New York and it was razzle-dazzled up and kind of ruined. And they went back to Australia and undid all that, returned to a lot of the earlier stuff they had written. They had several songs that had cut that they put back because they were character songs. And this wasn't as much about plot as it is about emotion and so forth, you know. Anyway, so they got it to a place where they were really happy with it, and then this company in Michigan did it like in February, March, I think. And the writers went up there for quite a while, like a few weeks, I think, and did a lot of rewrites with them in rehearsal. You know, as they would see how things worked or not worked, they could work on it, which, you know, is awesome. And then we were the first production that the writers weren't involved. But they got it to a place where they were pretty happy that this is the final version of it. So that's what we did. Now the CD, they just made recently, I think primarily so more people will know about the show and produce the show. And I think it's kind of a calling card to some extent. And the two leads on the CD, Leo and Trude, are their original Australian leads, and then I think everybody else is New York people. They recorded it in New York. So, but it leaves off like 3 songs, I think. And they didn't tell me why that is, and I wonder if maybe it's about room, because there are a lot of songs in this show. But they leave out 3 songs, I think a reprise or 2. So it's not the whole score, it's most of it.
Was it the American version that they had the racist character of
Gosh.
Fairmy?
Yeah, it was, well, Fairmy was a comic character in Australia, but he was like a clown off Broadway. And he had this whole song about all the women he wanted and how the different women were different.
I believe it was written, all of the women that Eddie wanted.
Yeah,
Like
it was
you
all
need
this-
really bad.
Like Monty Python Italian accent, and yeah, and the writers were telling me as they're working on the show, one of the like tech people or designer or somebody, they're talking about Fairmy, and one of the writers says to this guy, well, what do you think? And this guy's like, I think this is awful. I think it's terrible what you're doing to this great man. Like he was like, it's not funny. Which is a lesson they took to heart. And now, in this final version, Fairmy's a little funny once in a while. Like it's a little chuckle here and there. He's not a comic character, which I think is better.
Right. Any other questions?
I was just curious how much time goes into preparing a show from when it's cast to auditions and all, like how much time does that take?
It percolates in my head for about a year.
Let's say you and I had our first conversation last summer.
Yeah. Did we cast it last summer?
Yes.
I think that's right.
Yeah, because it would have been where our auditions are now.
Yeah. And then we went into rehearsal, I guess, first week of April. We rehearsed 3 times a week. And then opened, I guess, first of June.
Yeah, it feels it seems like a long period of time, but with the 3 nights a week, it's really not that much because some companies they have 2 weeks and work 10 to 6 to put it up, and like it's a crazy amount. But Scott is pretty good about picking the seasons in advance to where once one show closes, we could go on to the next one and start working on it.
And part of what we kind of tweaked our process over time. Part of what's cool about it is we do get a fair amount of calendar time to work on a show. And so, we can decide 3 or 4 weeks into rehearsal that we're on the wrong road and we should be on a different road. We can switch, which is so nice. And that doesn't happen often, but it has happened. And most of our actors have day jobs. So 3 nights a week is really nice for them.
Yeah.
Because there's some shows that are rehearsing 6 nights a week, and I was like, well, when do the actors memorize? Like if they had a day job, they're going straight to rehearsal.
Or rest.
Yeah, what do you know?
Does that answer your, okay. Yeah, because it's, and then that's what makes shows like, we were just saying the other night, like Bonnie and Clyde. That seems like it was forever ago, and it really wasn't. But even Heathers, that was this season, it just seems like it was so long ago. It blows my mind.
It was only in October, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Right. Any other questions? Anything?
Yeah, how do you guys sit in these chairs for any length of time?
They don't really like
Oh,
your time.
good, because they're really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We'll sit them sideways so we can share.
Oh yeah, that's more comfortable.
I did have a question that I didn't ask earlier for Kathleen. And I know you kind of touched on it and you said you enjoyed the show. But with the science that's in the show, with that, was there any part of it that you were like, oh, well, that's not, because they do take liberties with the characters that, they're not exactly the real people that they were. Does that bug you, knowing who those real people are?
For the most part, I thought it was right there. And I thought Scott did a great job because, well, even like when Sarah asked me about the authenticity of the goggles I provided, I pointed out that if you look at any of the archived pictures, nobody was wearing goggles during the original bombing. And
Those are in the car.
It's gone. I challenged and said, I don't even understand why this is here. It's a modern contrivance. That didn't exist then, and it's not in any of the historical photos. And Scott said, ouch, yeah. That was something that obviously the writers didn't know. So, overall, Sarah and Scott, they appreciated and worked with that. There were a lot of things, even, the pronunciations. I thought it was fantastic the way they did it. Even some of them, I had questions with Truda. How do you say Truda? And I called the author, the man who literally wrote the book, who studied sea llama down at Stanford for the last 20 years. It's nice. They're not like TV stars. You can call the Stanford professor and say, hey, I'm doing a show, and I have a nice talk with the gentleman. And he actually said, I'm not sure, but I'm going to meet his niece next week. Let me confirm that. So great, we had confirmation from Zillard's niece. It is Truda. I thought the cast did a fantastic job of staying true. But yes, there were some liberties. The one that bothered me, and Rob knows which one it is, Oppenheimer was an incredibly complex and gifted, crazy gifted human being. And the man was a polyglot. He spoke multiple, not just spoke, he was fluent in numerous languages. He taught himself Sanskrit. This is a man who's incredibly literate. And at the beginning, who teaches themselves Sanskrit?
Just do it.
Yeah, he was phenomenally intelligent. He used to correct other people all the time, and he was correct. But in the beginning of the show, there's a point at which he says, we didn't know jack shit. And that just, I'm like, no, a man who's that literate is not going to be so coarse and vulgar. It just, to me, that line does not fit his character. That one, yes, you can watch it next time, watch the show. But overall, their characterizations are fantastic. Your Truda is beautiful. You're so, I didn't, excuse me, I guess I said no. I didn't like the script the first time I read Truda because I was afraid she came across as too, too demure and not assertive enough. And she was a physician. She was a scientist in her own right and an intelligent person. And your portrayal is so authentic and true to how she really was. Sean, my goodness, I absolutely adore. He must have studied those tapes because I've watched him. Teller was unapologetic to the end. He justified everything. He carried himself in a manner, and Sean portrays that so wonderfully. Overall, I am so impressed with everything that they do, even with limitations in the language. The actors have done a phenomenal job portraying each actor. Fantastic.
How I kept telling Scott the whole time about Truda, I just always thought, well, one, your dialect, you sound just like my best friend Megan's grandmother, and she's German. You just sound just like her, and I love that. But the one thing I always thought it's like the biggest example of when there's a great man, there's always a great woman behind him, because normally, at least in the show, how he got his ideas is from something Truda said. And it was always that, well, I know it did, but in the show I found that interesting. I found that, I loved it, and I think it goes to the saying of how she was strong and saying, I'm, standing up for herself, I'm not gonna sit here and watch you die, but being blinded by, the headlights of his love, and she kept coming back, and I just, But I absolutely fell in love with the character of Trudeau watching this show and for everything you just said, and
I want to say about Zach, who plays Leo, the center of the story. I have learned over time, Zach has done so many shows with us, and I've learned over time pretty much to leave him alone. Like, as long as I know he knows where we're going, I leave him alone. And I don't always see the character until relatively late, but I'm so fine with that because it's always right. And when he first started showing us where he was going with Leo, I was kind of concerned because he was doing it so soft-spoken. And I'm like, okay, first of all, it's kind of low energy, and like, how's the mic gonna pick you up? And it's just like, I was thinking of all these practical things, and I was like, no, leave alone. And by the time we were really running it here in the space, I was realizing that it was absolutely the perfect choice. Like, it was exactly who this guy was. Like, exactly. It just makes total sense. And with all the trappings of sets and lights and costumes and everybody else and all that, it never feels like the energy comes out of it because it's such an intense performance, even though it's relatively quiet.
Yeah.
But it was one of those times where, as a director, I have to know, get out of the way. I know he's going to the right place, and I need to let him go there.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can add to that. I think what Zach has done really well, and I may try to blog about this and speak a little bit more to it, but you take a character who's a genius. A lot of times, like in the movies lately, like when we see like a character who's like a genius, they're really unlikable. They're weird. Maybe they have like bizarre tics. They're just assholes. Excuse me. They're terrible. Like even if they're a fictional character, like a Sherlock Holmes or something, like they're still like so cool that you kind of like them and you dig them. They're heroes. But what Zach was able to do, and maybe Kathleen, you can help me with this, is he was able to take this character who's an incredible genius, always right about everything.
Right. Always difficult.
Always a little bit difficult. Has an extremely strong, laser-focused moral compass, and make him really likable, and make him really, really human. Not the genius that's, sort of like prickly and really kind of a jerk, but really kind of a very lovable man. There's a lot of scenes where I think he kind of captures that he's really kind of human. He's got a little bit of a light sense of humor, and I think that's the writing. It's Zach. It's just, and it's kind of how the other characters react to him. Like you when he's let down, like you feel it. I think he did a really good job with it.
Yeah, I agree. But I think everybody's done a great job with just taking on this beast of a show. I mean, with having, everything involved in it. Sometimes the music, it seems like it may not fit. Like if you just listen to it on the CD, you're like, and when reading it, I was like, I don't see how this fits together. Like this one sounds really poppy compared to what's happening, but when it's all together, it flows and it goes. And everybody's just done a nice job with it, especially with the somewhat round staging. They really did a nice job, and it became natural. It wasn't, we had to get on some of them a while because they make movements like this. It's like, that's not natural, I mean, if you're gonna go there, walk there, and then you can turn around and talk to them over there, But they did a nice job.
And to that point, this was one of those shows where I really did not know what the end product was. I did not, because we were coming at it kind of different from the previous productions.
Right.
And so I really did not know what the end product was, which used to freak me out, and it doesn't anymore. Because I knew we were on the right road, and I just instinctually felt that this was a really cool piece. And so it's like, all right, well, wherever it takes us, it takes us. Sometimes I know where we're going. Sometimes it's like, all right, I'm on the ride too. Let's see what happens. This was definitely one of those, but I feel so good about how it turned out.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Just a big thank you for these guys for taking the time out to do this. Thank you guys. And then thank you guys again for coming. Our next show is Tell Me on a Sunday, which is a one-woman show by Andrew Lloyd Webber, starring Miss Sarah Porter. She will also be costuming herself. And I think a first time for New Line to where Scott will not be directing, and I will be directing this one.
The control freak has let go.
We'll see. But if you enjoyed this, please come again. We really love doing this stuff. Bring some friends. But if not, thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you at Tell Me on a Sunday. Thank you.
There's somebody else in the body buzz on this microphone.
Voice is not.
Thanks.
Oh, Scott.